combining upon each other. So I'm not sure we're sicker, but we are getting respiratory bug on respiratory bug like many of us saw last year, and many of us have got a bit of longer damage from COVID. So there is a bit of that going on. But also we're more aware, which I think is fantastic. We're much more aware now of what we can do about it, that we did know that things make a difference. Social distancing, staying home when you're sick, they made a difference.
And we all know how to wash our hands now, which is good. That's the best thing about COVID.
Hopefully. Do you sing happy birthday twice? I bet you don't.
Dr. Turner, I think it's really, I'm a mum of 2 uni students, and, you know, I've crossed this bridge with them both, and it was interesting because they belong to we're very lucky we've got a great GP here in Tamariki, but they went down to the South Island, and I did actually find it quite a challenge just trying to get them vaccinated because they had to go to a medical clinic. So there was some issues with the process, and one thing I thought was making it easy for caregivers with the under 5s, absolutely, but also there's a few hurdles I encountered with my uni students. So, yeah, I just hope that there's better mobilisation in the community. Pardon?
Yeah, I was saying, Nikki, you might be able to tell us, what do you do to try and get it to students? We dropped out again. Honestly, 3rd time's the charm now. That's the 3rd call that's dropped out. We've only got a minute left to go, I think, on the show. So, look, I will look at the feedback and see what you people are saying to us in the meantime. Skincare for children. There are people saying that, who's this? Katie, I have a 13-year-old. She seems to all she wants to do is make up her face and use all sorts of expensive creams and serums. I'm going to play this interview back to her. Very hard to persuade her away from thinking that she needs to put something on her face. That's tough, eh?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, that's tough, yeah.
Sarah Sparks, thank you very much for your time today on the panel. We've made it all the way through. Sorry to everybody listening for the dropped calls, but look, technology is sometimes against us. Mark Knopf-Brown, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
We're throwing over to Checkpoint now, and Lisa Owen, we'll see you tomorrow.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei burning questions about a minister's take on tobacco tax. Can Casey Costello keep her job? Wellington residents cry foul over water leaks as the spiralling cost of patching Wellington's pipes is finally made public. Mayor Tory Whanau is with us. Children's Minister Karen Chhour on how she's going to fix Oranga Tamariki. More people are failing to meet their mortgage payments. An iconic cake shop shuts its doors after almost 30 years, blaming the rising cost of living and soaring costs of ingredients like butter. And Australians scramble to buy tickets to win the biggest jackpot in the country's history. You can watch us live on the RNZ website. RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Tēnā tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. Labour is calling on the Prime Minister to remove Casey Costello from her associate health portfolio, saying she's not fit for the job. Ms Costello has again spent the day defending herself against reports she specifically requested advice on freezing the excise tax on tobacco. Here's our political reporter, Giles Dexter.
Casey Costello maintains she did not specifically ask for advice on freezing the excise tax, and she did not write the material she sent to officials. But Labour says when a minister gives documents to officials, that is their responsibility. Ms Costello says she is unsure of the authorship of the documents, which included previous New Zealand First party policy. But standing in for the Prime Minister, ACT leader David Seymour says he's been assured there has been no undue influence from the tobacco industry on the government's policies.
Oranga Tamariki insists it has improved the rates of children in care who see a social worker regularly. The Independent Children's Monitor's annual state care report has found 40% of Tamariki aren't seeing a social worker on time, a figure unchanged from the year before. But the agency's chief social worker, Peter Whitcomb, says that number has since dropped to 6%. Mr Whitcomb says vast improvements have been made since the reporting window closed in June. He says it's a result of more internal staff training, a focus on quality visits and building strong relationships with children. The head of Wellington Water says she doesn't accept a report criticising her organisation. Last year, Wellington City Council agreed to increase the water provider's budget by $2.3 million if it agreed to a review. The report was released today and has found Wellington Water isn't properly reporting how spending is improving the pipe network and that there's issues with contracts. Chief Executive Tonya Haskell says the scope of the report changed during its compilation.
Because the scope changed, they didn't come and talk to the right people necessarily. So there's some things in the report that aren't quite right and we weren't able to correct because we were at odds over what they were trying to achieve.
Tonya Haskell acknowledges some efficiencies can be made at Wellington Water. A man convicted of a violent murder in Norfolk Island more than 20 years ago is being deported to New Zealand. Nelson man Glenn McNeil was convicted in 2007 for the murder of Sydney woman Janelle Patton 5 years before. Adam Burns has more.
McNeil was sentenced to life imprisonment for the 2002 murder of Ms Patton. The 29-year-old woman's body was found wrapped in plastic on Norfolk Island after being beaten by a blunt object and stabbed repeatedly. Her killer was expected to be released from a prison in New South Wales today. The Department of Corrections says McNeil will be subject to a returning offenders order authorised by the Police Commissioner and will be under supervision. Stuff reports that McNeil is being deported to Christchurch.
And a Hawke's Bay resident who could be asked to pay some of the cost of demolishing his cyclone-wrecked home says he has nothing left to give. Hastings District Council is considering enforcing a contribution towards demolition costs after realising some homeowners' insurers paid out more than the market value of their properties and included cover for demolition. But Eskdale resident Dan Gale told today's council meeting it is unfair, it's changing the goalposts. He says insurance payouts haven't been enough to replace what was lost, as many were underinsured.
As one of our residents said, we have paid with everything we have, and some have even paid with their life. How much more contribution do you want? Come on, there is nothing left to contribute.
Councillors decided to ask staff for more information before voting on the proposal. To sport now, and the Warriors are backing Stacey Jones to be the next Kiwis coach. The Kiwis are recruiting a new coach following the departure of Michael Maguire in November. Experienced league coach Wayne Bennett says he's keen on the job, but Warriors coach Andrew Webster believes his assistant is the right fit for the New Zealand job.
The guy for me is Stacey Jones, yeah. I work with him every day, he teaches me things. He's got a real balance for rep football. He knows when less is more because they're the best players in the world, and he also knows, I just need to step in here and impose myself on the group, and culturally he's worn that jersey.
2 uncapped players have been named in the Football Ferns squad for next month's Olympic qualifying tournament in Samoa. Wellington Phoenix players Macy Fraser and Brianna Edwards are the only uncapped players in the 24-strong squad, which includes 5 players who weren't part of the end-of-year tour to Colombia. Striker Hannah Wilkinson, who missed the trip due to suspension, is back, but co-captain Rhea Percival, who recently moved clubs in the English Women's Championship, is missing. And Paris Olympic organisers have halved their estimate of the number of people expected to attend the Games opening ceremony. Organisers now expect about 300,000 will attend the ceremony, a 6-kilometre parade along the River Seine on July 26th. It will take place amid security concerns as France is on a high terrorism alert. Koinanga Pito Kōrero. That's the news.
US senators grill social media companies.
Mr. Zuckerberg, you and the companies before us, I know you don't mean it to be so, but you have blood on your hands.
Police officers say their compulsory fitness test is too hard.
Cops on there never had to climb over a wall, drag a body like they do, and they'd never be able to do that.
And checking out the Bounty Islands bird life.
And you actually feel like you really shouldn't be there. You know, it's not a place for humans. It's a seabird paradise.
Bountiful News Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National. You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and the Central Plateau, mainly fine today. Showers tomorrow with thunderstorms possible south of Whanganui in the evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine. Isolated showers today, a few spots of rain late tomorrow. Wellington and Wairarapa, also Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine with isolated showers today. Tomorrow, cloudy periods with rain for a time, possibly heavy. Severe gale northwesterlies in exposed parts of Wellington, Wairarapa and Marlborough from the afternoon. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, isolated showers. Rain developing overnight. Frequent showers tomorrow afternoon with squally thunderstorms possible. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, isolated showers. Turning to rain tomorrow morning, then showers with possible thunderstorms and hail. And Rekohu, Chatham Islands, rain easing to showers this evening, possibly heavy later tomorrow. The time is 5:07. I'll have traffic news and headlines at 5:20.
Kia ora rā e ho, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai, ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The country's SmokeFree Minister is facing calls to be sacked, with the Labour Party questioning the newbie MP's integrity. Casey Costello, who is a New Zealand First MP and Associate Health Minister, is feeling the heat after she told RNZ she had not specifically sought advice on freezing tobacco tax at all. That's despite documents showing she did ask for advice from officials, and RNZ has today revealed more information about the correspondence. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
A minister under pressure. Casey Costello faced a third consecutive day of questioning today over tobacco proposals she sent to her officials.
I want to be clear, they were not my proposals or notes. They were not things I had written. This was general information I had provided officials, and I'm sure they can verify this.
RNZ has obtained that information sent to the Health Ministry, a grab bag of policy suggestions and observations. The documents propose a freeze on tobacco tax and tax breaks for low-nicotine cigarettes. Ms Costello says the papers were just a collection of old New Zealand First policies and positions, which she provided to, quote, guide conversation. But who wrote them?
I couldn't tell you the author of that document. It's in the document archives.
Do things in her office just appear out of thin air?
Labour's Aisha Verrill is incensed and wants to know whether the tobacco industry has had a hand in writing those documents. She says the minister's truthfulness is in question. Casey Costello last week told RNZ she had not sought specific advice on freezing tobacco tax, despite sending the idea to the ministry and then later circling yes when asked if she wanted advice on it.
Did she deny seeking advice on a tobacco excise tax freeze when asked by Radio New Zealand, despite having actually sought that advice, because she did not want to be questioned on her plans to give tax breaks to the tobacco industry?
No.
Her defence centres on that word specific, and that she sought a wide range of advice, not that specifically. The information sent also includes some provocative statements, including that nicotine is only as harmful as caffeine. Ms Costello would not front for interviews today, so we could not ask her if she agreed with that point. But we could ask some of her cabinet colleagues.
No.
Oh, look, that will depend on dose response curves, on body mass index, and a whole range of other things.
It depends if you're thinking about what goes with it.
Labour says the minister's reputation has gone up in smoke. She must step down or be sacked.
How can you be a Minister of Health when you are mostly concerned about the health of the tobacco industry?
Is this the standard of ministerial behaviour that Christopher Luxon thinks is acceptable?
Indeed, the question has now become one for the Prime Minister, and in Auckland today, Christopher Luxon came to Casey Costello's defence.
My conversations with Casey Costello, she is determined to lower smoking rates now amongst the 6.8% of daily smokers. She's asking for a range of advice as a new minister. She's determined to do it. I've spoken to her about it. She's passionate about it. She cares about it. I've got confidence that she wants to do that.
The Prime Minister does seem aware of the potential risk here, though, and says he's sought assurances from both his coalition partners that they've not received donations from Big Tobacco. Both said they had not, but that is unlikely to end the story.
Interested in your thoughts on that one? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Calls for Casey Costello to step down from her job. Let us know what you think. Do you agree or not, and why? 11 minutes after 5, Ki amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Another day, another gloomy report into Oranga Tamariki showing the agency still not getting the basics right. It is the second in a week. Disappointing and heartbreaking is how the Children's Minister describes the findings. A report today from the Independent Children's Monitor reveals almost 40% of children in OT's care are not getting as many social worker visits as they should. And about a third of children are placed with unapproved carers. Oranga Tamariki's own Safety of Children in Care report shows a growing number of children are being harmed in the care of the very agency supposed to protect them, most in residential facilities, which the government plans to build more of. But Children's Minister Karen Chhour believes she can do what many have failed to: fix it.
Yeah, obviously it's really disappointing and heartbreaking to read those reports. It really makes me reflect back onto why I put my hand up to be in this space in the first place. I'm really wanting to make some real change in that space, and each and every report just tells us what we already know. So now's the time to actually act on that and make sure we're having better outcomes for our young people.
Everybody comes into that job, though, wanting to make the changes and to do better, and many of them have failed. So how confident are you that you can turn this around?
Yeah, I've spent the last 3 weeks going out and talking to the sector, talking to the frontline staff about what are some of the things that they would like to see change in their space. And it's around making sure that they have the tools and the resources that they need to do their job and do their job well. And I think that's something that we really need to focus into, because sometimes social workers are going above and beyond, but they just don't have the tools to do the job to the best of their ability.
Well, that is reflected in these reports. Lack of funding and resources are a common theme. Are they going to get more from you? And by that I mean a bigger budget and more resources.
Look, it's not about how much money we're spending, because right now we're spending more money than we've ever spent before, but we're not getting better outcomes. It's about making sure that the money we are spending is focused, targeted, and has an outcome at the end. That's my focus, making sure we're outcomes focused, because we can spend all the money in the world, but if we're not making sure that that money is going to the right places, we're not going to make any difference at all. And we've seen that over the last 6 years.
So where are you going to take the money from within Oranga Tamariki and redirect it to what?
It's just about making sure that we are redirecting the funds into the right place, like you've said.
From where to where, though, Minister?
There is a lot of money that is spent in the back office, in spaces where we actually could be doing that job a lot better with a little bit less money that could be repurposed to the front line.
When you're talking about backroom functions at Oranga Tamariki that you don't need, what are those? Because I imagine it is absolutely essential to keep accurate records, to know when social workers are visiting people, to keep track of these young people, and there's thousands of them. So what backroom services specifically will you cut from Oranga Tamariki?
Yeah, look, some of that back office space, we could be looking at comms as one of them. Could be looking at some middle management jobs where there might be some double ups where we could consolidate in some spaces and get the same results. I mean, this is something that I'm seeking advice on now currently, and you realise that the Finance Minister has a budget coming up, and so that will be part of our budget proposal, so I can't speak too much on that at the moment, but we are looking in every area to make sure that every dollar spent has a good outcome. When you talk about targets,
only 61% of children in the care of Oranga Tamariki are being seen by social workers, the number of times they're supposed to under their good practice model, and a third of placements are not properly assessed before a child is placed in them. What targets do you envisage, and are those numbers acceptable to you?
Yeah, so this is something that I campaigned on, and it's been an issue for a very long time, and it's been to my attention even before I became an MP, around do these young people actually get sighted enough to make sure that they are safe? And part of my campaigning was to improve that space around having a mentor for a young person that can follow them through their journey to make sure that they are okay and they have someone to advocate for them. It's also around the independent monitoring of Oranga Tamariki. A bill passed when I was in opposition that I feel created a lot of gaps in that space. And so there is an agreement between ACT and National around creating a completely independent monitor for Oranga Tamariki, independent completely of Oranga Tamariki and any instructions from the Minister. So we know that we're going to get independent advice back.
I note that the highest percentage of harm to kids is children in Oranga Tamariki residences, youth justice facilities, and ACT is keen to build more of them. The evidence seems to run counter to that being a good idea, doesn't it?
Yeah, so what we need to actually do is focus on what is the issue there. Some things have changed in that space that may have some kind of explanation as to why the older age groups have come under more harm. This could be the law change where the age actually went up, so we're mixing 17-year-olds with 14-year-olds within the youth justice space. So we're looking at, is there a way that we can make that safe space, that space safer for young people by having a separate area for the older children? That would require creating more space within youth justice, and that is something that I am seeking advice on currently.
Minister, is Oranga Tamariki fixable, or do you just need to tear it down and start from the beginning again?
Oh, look, it's definitely fixable. We have so many people within the organisation where they are passionate about making some real change for young people so that they're not just surviving when they leave care, they're thriving. And we just need to make sure that you realise it's not just one organisation that can fix this. This is a multi-agency approach. It's about making sure every agency is stepping up and doing their part and getting Oranga Tamariki back to their main focus, which is actually care and protection of our most vulnerable.
And that's the Children's Minister, Karen Chhour. A damning report into how water's dealt with in the capital has heaped blame on the council and water operator for bad communication and slow response to reports of leaks. It also says Wellington Water's lax reporting means it can't clearly show how it is spending ratepayers' money to fix the pipes. Wellington Water has responded saying it doesn't accept the findings, will not approve it or sign off on its recommendations. We'll hear more from the Wellington Mayor Tory Whanau shortly. Meanwhile, residents dealing with the leaks in the city say they've been there so long they now have resident populations of ducks. Some are even rerouting their leaks to water their gardens. Jemima Houston reports.
Zoe Reid is a gardener helping locals put the water pouring out of thousands of leaky pipes around Wellington to good use. She finds a leak on the road, sets up a dustpan, bucket or a cup in the gutter, then connects a hose and runs it to a nearby garden.
The scoop's going to fill up with water and then it's going to get to the top where the hose is, and then the hose is going to make the water travel the whole way to the garden, which is maybe 3 metres away.
She says as long as the garden is downhill of the leak, it's easy to make a system to collect the water.
As long as it's going lower, it's quite easy. If it's on a hill, that's even better. Yeah, I mean, this one took me about 5 minutes.
Zoe says it's ridiculous how much clean water is being lost to leaks, but she says leak harvesting is a good way to put that water to use and give your vegetables a drink while restrictions banning sprinklers are in place.
It's hard when you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of plants and you're just watching them die. And then you're watching the sports fields get irrigated and the water coming out of your road.
Last year, Wellington City Council agreed to put an extra $2.3 million into its annual budget for the region's water services provider to repair leaks. But that was conditional on Wellington Water agreeing to part-fund a review by international company Field Force 4 of its services. The report, released today, shows money might be going down the drain, with Wellington Water failing to properly report how it's being spent to improve the pipe network. It also found huge delays in responding to people reporting leaks. Catherine from Karori knows that all too well. A leak in her neighbourhood was first reported in October last year, and it still hasn't been seen to. She says it's been getting bigger and bigger and is sending masses of clear water streaming down a driveway and into a drain.
And it has actually gouged out the asphalt on the driveway in 2 places. It's made a pool, and now ducks have taken up residence on the pool. So there's a nice little couple of ducks swimming around.
Catherine says it's a terrible waste, but she hopes Wellington Water is doing its best to fix things.
Let's just hope that they throw a bit more money at the problem and start putting some more fixes in before water restrictions in Wellington are tightened this summer even further.
Sharon Dash lives in Kilburnie and reported a leak in the middle of her street before Christmas, and it still hasn't been fixed. She says the leak started after crews had been working on the pipe.
I thought, well, maybe they could just check that they turned it off properly when they'd fixed it, but they haven't done anything about it. The water is just dribbling down the middle of the street every day, all day.
Sharon says Kilburnie is notorious for spouting leaks, and the community proactively reports them on the council's Fix It app.
It's obscene, it really is. And you just want to get in there and fix it yourself, if only I could.
Wellington Water doesn't accept the findings in the council's review, but says it has already made improvements to the way it works. It maintains that reforming the water sector is the best way to improve services in Wellington.
Jemima Houston with that report. And if you have spotted a leak in Wellington, we'd be grateful if you would let us know about it. Where is it and how long's it been there? You can text us on 2101. Or if you've got a photo, even better, to share, email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. 22 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening, including your thoughts on Casey Costello, Associate Health Minister, and her comments on, plans for freezing tobacco tax and advice she sought from officials and how she's handled that. Some calls for her resignation. Text on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Also interested in information about leaks in and around Wellington. Time to go to the headlines now. Ko ewe anō tēnei.
Labour wants Associate Health Minister Casey Costello removed from her role, saying she's not fit to hold office. Documents show Casey Costello asked her ministry for advice on freezing tobacco excise, despite denying specifically seeking that advice to RNZ. The minister maintains the request was in general information she had provided officials. But Labour's health spokesperson, Dr Aisha Verrill, says when a minister's office provides documents, it's her responsibility and it's rubbish to claim otherwise. The Independent Children's Monitor is at odds with Oranga Tamariki over the number of children not seeing a social worker as often as they should. The Monitor's annual state care report has found 40% of Tamariki aren't seeing a social worker on time, a figure unchanged from the year before. But Oranga Tamariki insists the figure has actually dropped to 6%. A man convicted of a violent murder in Norfolk Island more than 20 years ago is being deported to New Zealand. Nelson man Glenn McNeil was convicted in 2007 for the murder of Sydney woman Janelle Patton. McNeil received a life sentence but is expected to be released from prison in New South Wales. The Workplace Relations Minister, Brooke van Velden, has described the latest minimum wage increase as a cautious one and says it strikes the right balance. The rate is set to increase by 2% to $23.15 an hour from April the 1st. And Massey University has denied suggestions the latest round of proposed staff cuts will harm its reputation. Up to 40 people could go from its College of Humanities and Social Sciences as the university faces a deficit of over $50 million. College Pro-Vice-Chancellor Professor Cynthia White says the proposed cuts are necessary. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Auckland on State Highway 16, the Northwestern Motorway, there's a breakdown just before Rosebank Road off-ramp heading west. The middle left westbound lane is blocked there. And in the central North Island, roadworks at Hallett's Bay will now see State Highway 1 closed during the long weekend between Taupo and Tūrangi. That's on Sunday and Monday, 9 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. on both days. Our next traffic news and news headlines are at 20 to 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. The All Blacks will be globetrotting this year, taking tests to 9 different countries in a packed schedule, but one place that still isn't on the itinerary is Fiji. New Zealand and Fiji will play a one-off test in San Diego in July, marking the first time the All Blacks have been back in the Southern Californian city in 44 years. Despite the All Blacks never playing an official test in Fiji, New Zealand Rugby CEO Mark Robinson says they couldn't make it work this year.
We'd love to play a test match in Fiji at some stage, but there are a few different reasons behind why we couldn't make that happen, and the time frame that sort of lapsed in terms of being able to make that happen meant we drew back to one game, and then ultimately we thought the best thing to do for a variety of reasons was to take that offshore to the west coast of the States.
And we're joined now by sports reporter Felicity Reid. Well, that's pretty surprising. Why have the All Blacks opted to go to the United States? No test in Fiji.
So scheduling and the World Rugby calendar, the types of things that New Zealand Rugby like to bring up when a situation like this arises, they will play a part in that. But when you think about it, it's actually the bigger draw card of taking the commercial opportunities which you get from going to the US opposed to going to Fiji, which is obviously a more passionate rugby market and a ready-made rugby market. But New Zealand Rugby have really opted to try and what they say is establish a commercial and on-field sort of presence in the US ahead of the Rugby World Cup, which will be played there in 7 years' time. So they're obviously giving themselves plenty of time to establish that relationship with an American audience, which means until then, Fiji still waiting in the background. New Zealand Rugby put out the release today, and the new coach, Scott Robertson, said the Fijians know their way around the world and they'll come out from everywhere. I know a lot of Kiwis will make the trip as well. So I think there's a lot of expectation that this will be well supported by some of these people, but not in the home country and not potentially where those Fijian people actually want to be playing and want to see the Fijian rugby side playing. Mark Robinson, though, outlines that this is about the bigger picture.
I guess if you look at this next 8 years into 2031, we've got a chance to create a bit of a roadmap as to how we might work with our teams in black to create more awareness for the game and certainly a deeper understanding of New Zealand Rugby, the All Blacks and all of our teams.
That match wasn't the only one announced today. The whole season was lined out for us. And so the All Blacks do kick off under the roof in Dunedin against England on July 6th. Auckland get 2 tests. Wellington gets 2 tests before they head to South Africa, Australia, Japan, England, Ireland, France and Italy.
Let's talk about the Warriors prop, Aidan Fonua-Blake. He's cleared the air with his teammates after trying to leave the NRL club in the off-season.
Yeah, Fonua-Blake had asked for an immediate request to get out of the Warriors during the off-season. It was on compassionate grounds. He wanted to move back to Australia, closer to home, closer to family. We questioned him about it today and he didn't really want to open up on particularly the reasons. He says they're quite personal as to why he wanted to do that. But the Warriors didn't really bend to this request straight away. They have kept him for next season, which, as you can imagine, might be a little bit awkward in the locker room. But Fonua-Blake says he has spoken with his teammates in pre-season.
I just didn't want it to linger on. The Warriors isn't about me, you know what I mean? It's about everyone here. I didn't want to come in and always be the talking point of the team. I wanted us to come in here and focus on the team first. So I felt like I had to get up and address it, and once I addressed it, I felt like we've all moved on. You know, it feels like no one can remember that I'm going, you know what I mean? I'm pretty happy that it's all behind us.
Fonua-Blake did also admit that there was some miscommunication or maybe a sort of reading of what was going on when he was talking to Warriors management about this request. He had asked while he was overseas with the Tongan team, so it was a phone call. He said he'd wanted to wait until he came back, but didn't want to drop this proposition on the Warriors on the first day of pre-season. So he'd had this conversation over the phone. Wires might have got a little bit crossed, but he's ended up at the Sharks in 2025. And a little bit of a quirk of the NRL draw. Warriors' first game of the next season, the Sharks.
Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid, sports reporter there. Want your thoughts on the All Blacks having never played an official test in Fiji, and it ain't going to happen this year either. Instead, they're going to play Fiji in San Diego, 2101 on text. What do you make of it? Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The squeeze has been put on homeowners with mortgage arrears at a 4-year high. Cranked up interest rates have meant homeowners have missed payments or gone interest only. Centrix says there are nearly 21,000 overdue mortgage accounts, up 21% on the year before. Financial advisor Glenn McLeod from Edge Mortgages joins us now. Kia ora, Glenn.
Kia ora.
What are you seeing?
Oh, look at the coldface. We're seeing a lot of customers that are getting to the point where they are struggling with their home loan payments. It's becoming more and more apparent at the latter part of 2023, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of it through 2024 as rates are still high and not retreating at a rapid rate of knots.
Talk to me about this thing that you advisors call rate shock.
Yeah, so rate shock is when you take out a mortgage, and let's say you've taken out $1 million mortgage and you've put it all as one loan to mature in, say, 12 months' time. And if rates go up in that 12-month period, all of a sudden you've got a big lift in what your repayments are. So we try and guard against that as advisors by splitting that loan up into 2 or 3 smaller loans of, say, 350, 350, and then 300. So that what it does is it means that not the whole lot is affected at the same time. So you might have a gradual increase in rates rather than one big lump.
So have lots of people been caught out by that, Glenn? Just the rollover in interest rates and then all of a sudden, whammy, they're doubling their payments?
Oh, yeah, I dare say so. Over the marketplace, we've seen such a huge increase over the last few years that the expectation probably wasn't that we'd have got here as quickly. So if they were getting advice that wasn't from an advisor, they probably would have just gone and put it all in one lump sum. It's nice and easy to manage, but it's not always in the best interest of the client.
So how accommodating are banks being? Are you seeing many people ask for interest only?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because interest only is a way that you can actually reduce your payments down for a period of time. However, if you're in a position where it's starting to become hard to keep up with your mortgage and you're going into arrears, you have to go through to one of the hardship teams from the banks. They don't allow financial advisors to work direct with our own existing customers. If they're getting to that point, they have specialist teams that they've set up. And so, you know, whilst they are as accommodating as they can be, it's a lottery as to what sort of result that you're going to get. Interest only may be the option. The other option might be that you need to go on a mortgage holiday for a few months to give you time to sell if you're at that position, or to find another stream of income.
What about people dipping into KiwiSaver?
Yeah, that's a real shame if that's having to happen. I mean, KiwiSaver's there for the retirement because as life goes on, we may not have a superannuation scheme that's going to help from the government. So relying on KiwiSaver later is something that I think everyone should have front of mind. But if they're having to dip in, it'll be a limited amount of money and it'll help for a period of time. But if you're hoping that that's going to be the panacea to get you out of the entire situation, you might find that rates don't go down for quite a period of time, and therefore you're starting to chew those funds up. So it's where you really need to probably go and sit down with a financial advisor. There's a good number of them around the country. We're all qualified. We have to be. We're legislated to make sure that we're out to look after the best interests of the clients. And there are some very, very good advisors in this country.
Appreciate your time, Glenn. That's Glenn McLeod from Edge Mortgages there. It is 27 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. We'll stick with a theme. Time for business now. Ko taku hoa NINA, ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins me in the studio. I'm going to talk about the casino operator, Sky City. What can you tell us?
Well, we have talked about them over a period of time. They were under investigation in Australia for anti-money laundering and the terrorism piece of legislation there. Well, it turns out that the regulator has decided that, in fact, there is a case to answer of some kind. And so they have, Sky City's agreed to pay a fine of $75 million for its trouble there. So that was the alleged breaches of anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing laws relating to its Adelaide casino. It's not the end of the story, though. There's still other investigations going on, and not just in Australia, but here at home as well. So there is still cases to answer. Whether or not this concludes everything, we don't know. Sky City's not talking while this is all going on. But look, in any case, I guess the market was, reasonably happy with where Sky City is at the moment, because the share price ended up 6% today as a result.
Electricity retailers, Nona, will be required to take good care of their customers. Why aren't they required to take good care of them now?
Not required to, but voluntarily do so, because there are some guidelines that the industry has had for about a decade, and they set out all sorts of things that they should be doing for their customers. But this is going to be mandatory, and the kinds of things that's going to be mandatory are, for example, that consumers that are medically dependent on electricity are going to be made sure that they have special care. It's not going to be voluntary. You're going to have to do it. Also, it includes things like how consumers manage their bills. If they're having trouble, what needs to happen? How do you manage that? So it's basically making the retailers, the electricity retailers, look after the customers better. The Electricity Retailer Association, I think that's what they're called. Oh, go figure. They already follow these guidelines, and so do their members. And they're saying that they are pleased to hear that these guidelines are being beefed up, but that they have been following them anyway since they've been put in place. And I think that was, a decade ago. So there's also a comment there from the Consumer Advocacy Council. They said the decision by the Electricity Authority is fantastic news for consumers. So it's not going to be a lot different for those consumers who've already been treated well under the voluntary guidelines. But for those who haven't, it will now be mandatory. So there you go.
Markets now. Thanks, Nona.
All right, so the top 50 index rose about 1/3%, of course, helped along there by Sky City. That was a 45-point gain to 11,971. We're seeing that that's not so bad considering where Asians' shares are. They faltered somewhat following an announcement earlier today by the U.S. Federal Reserve, which was not what the market wanted to hear. It is that they're going to keep their interest rates where they are. They're still waiting to see inflation come back into what they consider to be a stable place. In the meantime, though, they didn't suggest that they were going to hike interest rates. So that was a bit of a positive. Never mind, the New Zealand dollar is only just a bit stronger, 61.3 US cents, 93.4 Australian and 48.3 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with business news. After almost 30 years in business, an Auckland cakery this afternoon closed its doors for the final time, blaming tighter household budgets and soaring cost of ingredients like butter. The city cake company in Mount Eden was run by the late Maureen Keane and her daughter Tracy Beard, but grief and compounding costs have taken over. With the company in liquidation owing $30,000 today was the last day customers could get their sweet fix, with everything half price in the hopes nothing would go to waste. Louise Tanous and camera operator Marika Habazi were there.
Last day. It's going to be weird.
For almost 30 years, Tracy Beard and her late mother Maureen Keane have been making cakes for every occasion in Auckland's Mount Eden village. But after Maureen passed away suddenly last year, Tracy was forced to take on all responsibilities. Something she admits was too much in the end. The business owes the creditors $30,000.
It was a baptism by fire in that I was trying to do a lot of things that I probably wasn't my wheelhouse, and then trying to deal with grief and all those other sort of personal things all at once, and it became a bit overwhelming, to be honest.
It's been a death of 1,000 cuts, but the main culprit is tight household budgets, with cakes the first thing to be sacrificed. There's also been a staggering price increase of ingredients.
At Christmas, I was figuring out that it was cheaper to buy butter from Countdown than it was at our wholesalers. So butter, for instance, went up over a few years from about $2 or so a block to almost $7 a block.
Shutting up shop for good was a hard decision after 3 decades watching people grow up buy cake.
I mean, I've had customers that have been buying cakes for all of their family's birthdays for 25 years religiously, and it's a lovely, lovely, kind bunch of people.
With plenty of ingredients like chocolate and fresh cream left, not wanting them to go to waste, they did what they did best and got baking. This week, everything is half price.
It's the vanilla bean cake with raspberry buttercream. Oh, it looks lovely.
With queues out the door, many locals have turned up in support to say their last goodbyes.
We're just devastated that given the economic and trading conditions, she's been unable to survive.
It's been one of the lovely spots that's been just part of this village and just the fabric of who's here, and they've been around for so long.
I had my little boy's first birthday cake from here. It was absolutely beautiful. It was a Peter Rabbit cake, and they made this amazing Peter Rabbit for him, and I wanted to get my little girl's first birthday cake from here as well. So I was really sad to hear that they're closing down.
They had a long-term dream of having a cake shop, so when the space further up the road became available, and Tracy and Maureen set up the City Cake Company, so quite pioneering in their own way.
Tracy says almost all 4 staff have worked here since the business opened in 1995.
My head chef and cake decorator had been here 23 years. My kitchen assistant had been here 21 years. They become family, and that was probably the most difficult part for me personally.
The feeling is mutual for cake decorator Jessie De Souza.
This is carrot cake, one of our best seller with cream cheese icing, yes.
Jessie gets emotional, describing everyone here as family.
While driving here, actually, I was in tears, thinking about the company because I love the company so much. And yeah, so, but this is not the end. Still there is hope, so hopefully someone will save it.
Tracy's hoping a keen caker will snap up this place to carry on Maureen's legacy.
Honestly glad she's not here to see this. It would have broken her heart. It was her mum's recipes. Everything she cared about, every bit of ingredient, every process, it was her passion, and that would be sad for her.
If you were listening to that on radio, do check out the video version. Some beautiful pictures there, delicious looking cakes. It is 18 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A lot of your feedback coming in. Let's get to a couple about Casey Costello. This is the Associate Health Minister over the issue of tobacco. This listener, Sharon, says it is not acceptable for a minister to deny responsibility for instructions that came from her office to a government department. To say that she doesn't know who sent the instructions is simply not credible. Lucy is on the other side of the fence. I support Casey Costello. We live in a democracy, not a wowser dictatorship, says Lucy. 2101 on text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ to join that conversation. Time to go to the headlines now. Ko Evi Anotime. Labour is tonight saying Associate Health Minister Casey Costello isn't fit to hold office and should be removed. Casey Costello is under fire after sending documents to her ministry for advice on freezing tobacco excise, despite denying specifically seeking that advice to RNZ. The minister maintains the requests were not her proposals or notes, but general information she had provided officials. Dunedin's Punjabi community wants Gurjit Singh's killer caught. The 27-year-old was found stabbed to death outside his Liberton home on Monday. The Otago Punjabi Foundation Trust says someone must have heard something and the killer needs to be off the street. The Children's Minister says more money alone won't fix Oranga Tamariki's shortcomings. A third grim report in 2 weeks has found nearly half of children aren't seeing a social worker regularly enough, and reports of abuse and neglect have risen. Minister Karen Chhour told Checkpoint she's spent the last 3 weeks with frontline Oranga Tamariki staff who are under-resourced. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg has apologised to families who say their children had been harmed by social media during a fiery hearing in the US Senate. The head of Instagram and Facebook, along with the bosses of TikTok, Snap, X and Discord, were questioned at length by senators from both parties in front of families who said their children had self-harmed or killed themselves as a result of social media content. And one of Hamilton Zoo's giraffes has died after a health checkup. The 19-year-old male giraffe Indale was anaesthetised yesterday for the health check and died this morning.
Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, there's been a crash on Auckland's southern motorway before East Tamaki Road. The right southbound lane was blocked but has been now cleared. There may be residual delays there. Still in Auckland, a breakdown before Rosebank Road off-ramp heading west on State Highway 16 has been cleared of lanes also. And if you're travelling through State Highway 1 in the central North Island this long weekend, Sunday and Monday will see closures to State Highway 1 because of roadworks at Hallett's Bay between Taupō and Tūrangi. That's going to be from 9 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Sunday and Monday. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. Maintenance costs for Wellington's waterworks have jumped a massive 71% in the past 3 years, according to a just released report. The independent review ordered by the council also details slow response times to fix leaks and maintenance issues. Non-urgent repairs that should be fixed in less than 5 days are taking 40 days to patch up. The capital's water agency disputes the report. Right now, 40% of the capital's drinking water is being lost to leaks. Wellington Water wants $2.5 billion over 10 years to fix the pipes, and the council is faced with the challenge of funding ageing infrastructure. Mayor Tory Whanau insists the council is capable of dealing with the capital's water woes.
We absolutely are. So Wellington Water and our overall infrastructure is our number one priority. We had an LTP briefing yesterday which shows that from CapEx we will be putting in 1.1 billion and overall it'll be 1.8. We are now planning on implementing water meters and we're going to work very collaboratively with the Minister and with our regional stakeholders to get on top of this issue.
So in terms of working with the Minister, is there any talk of a commissioner being brought in?
No, absolutely none.
Are you worried about that?
No, I'm not. And the Minister has since said publicly that that hasn't even crossed his mind.
Okay, you've got 40% of your drinkable water leaking, massive bill hanging over your head for fixing the pipes, water restrictions, and people very unhappy. You say you're capable of dealing with it, but are the public seeing results?
I think what we're seeing here is we've not invested as much as we could have over the previous decades, and now it's all coming to a head. We're seeing pipes burst. So what's actually important now is how we move forward. We have to invest the money, and I know that the region is committed to that. But what's also important is how we develop a more sustainable CCO model, because that in essence will help the longer term funding of these pipes.
Do you want water taken off your plate altogether as a council?
We still want to manage water. I think what is difficult here now without Three Water reform, we have the separation of our balance sheet means that we can't provide the funding that Wellington Water needs or what the CCO model needs. So I'm looking forward to working with the Minister to see how we can do that for future reform.
Right, so you're happy to have this problem still? You wouldn't rather offload it to someone else?
No, not at all. I think even as I came in as Mayor, I knew this was a big, complex issue, and my goodness, it is more so than I thought. But I'd be proud to be able to help contribute to a more future sustainable water infrastructure.
We get a lot of people texting us and have this week saying they've reported leaks. One said they reported a leak in December. It was marked as a moderate leak and, well, it's still pouring into a black hole outside of their property now that we're in February. A number of others saying that. Someone says they've got ducks that have moved in because of the volume of water that's coming out of a leak near them, despite reporting it. And I see in the report out today that maintenance that should be resolved in 5 days is now taking 40 days to fix.
So I would say that Wellington Water are under-resourced. There are not as many technicians as we need out on the ground. And I think when we look at the longer-term CCO model, that'll be a huge consideration as well. A lot of people left Wellington Water as well.
How can you improve response times in the immediate term? You are hemorrhaging 40% of your drinkable water and you have response times that are blown out by days and days.
Oh, that's probably best a question for Wellington Water, who do the contact, but it did come up in the report to consider.
They're controlled by the council, though, so you must have concerns. Surely be talking to them about that.
Yep, so they come in through us, and then we pass the contact on to Wellington Water to manage.
And what are you saying?
What
are you saying to them about their response times? Because even in urgent situations where things are supposed to be resolved within 4 hours, now taking more than a day.
Well, this is also why we commissioned this report, to see what ways we could do to inform the performance of Wellington Water and our water network. So there's a range of things. Again, they're under-resourced, and the report does show that we should consider the relocation of the first point of contact to streamline it a bit and stop double-ups. That will be a long-term fix because it requires water reform to be able to do that. But I won't lie, it's a very complex problem that we have, but our region is committed to addressing them all.
Do you accept that you're losing 40% of your drinkable water through leaks? Because Mayor Wayne Guppy seems to be suggesting it may not be measured correctly.
Our findings show that it is, for Wellington City, has been measured correctly, and look, that's not great at all, but it shows the state of our current pipes and the need to put significant investment into them around the region.
And that is Wellington Mayor Tory Whanau. Nearly half of children in Oranga Tamariki care are not seeing a social worker as often as they should. The Independent Children's Monitor has released another grim report into the agency, tasked with caring for vulnerable Tamariki. Its annual report on state care found instances of children being neglected or abused while in care increased, despite there being fewer kids in the system. Neva Chittick reports.
Another sad state of affairs for those cared for by the state.
Not a good result, and it's not changing, despite their commitment to prioritise. I guess what's disappointing in Oranga Tamariki's response to our report this year is they are silent on any commitment to prioritise those visits.
This is the Independent Children's Monitor's third report. Chief Executive Aaron Jones says there's simply been no improvement.
These services need to be prioritised for these kids. We know what happens if they're not. They go on and have poorer long-term outcomes. So it's crucial that they're cared for. These children didn't ask to come into the care of the state. And when the state steps in to be their parents, then they need to be the very best parent they can be.
40% of children in Oranga Tamariki's care are not seeing a social worker regularly enough, a grim statistic that's unchanged from the year before. Oranga Tamariki's chief social worker, Peter Whitcomb, insists vast improvements have been made since the reporting window closed in June.
The numbers of visits that children are receiving by social workers has improved significantly over the last 6 months. We now know that figure is at 94% of Tamariki, so we've seen around a 30% lift.
He says it's a result of more internal training, a focus on quality visits and building strong relationships with Tamariki. But Mr Whitcomb is really concerned by the reports finding that children are having, on average, 10 social workers assigned to them during their time in care.
I will be doing work this year to ensure that we do not have children on any kind of conveyor belt where they are having multiple changes of social work. We know that workload is having an impact on this. We know that there is really significant pressure.
Chief Children's Commissioner Claire Ahmad says the time for action is now.
The need for that action is urgent. Children and young people themselves have been saying that they want to be safe and well supported in the care of the state. And actually that's their right. I'm looking forward to seeing Oranga Tamariki once and for all following through on its promises. I believe that can happen.
Peter Whitcomb says Oranga Tamariki has already begun a systems update, so in future it can provide data on things like mental health assessments and school attendance.
The information that they do have around school attendance and our children, that's a work in progress, but there is urgency around us having this information, and I do believe that we will see that improve next year.
The report says positive examples of interagency collaboration had begun to emerge. There were also more referrals to transition services for rangatahi leaving care and increased numbers of parental support plans.
It is 6 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Massey University is being warned of severe consequences if it goes ahead with its proposed cuts to humanities staff. A politics professor says plans to slash jobs will affect the university's reputation, the quality of its education and its place in society. But Massey says it would be irresponsible to keep living outside its means. Jimmy Allingham reports.
The cash-strapped university, staring down an expected deficit of more than $50 million last year, is proposing to reduce staff numbers at its College of Humanities and Social Sciences. About 40 people could lose their jobs, and politics professor Richard Khour says that couldn't come at a worse time.
It's a matter of public concern. We think that the cuts that are proposed will damage our college and our university's capacity to contribute the kinds of educated people that economically, socially, politically, culturally are required at a challenging time in history.
No courses are on the chopping block, leaving remaining staff, such as Professor Khour, worried about workloads.
There will be questions around health and safety issues for staff. Questions probably of greater public interest, I think, around the nature of the student experience and the quality of the education that they will receive.
Professor Khour says staff cuts could lead to a death spiral for Massey as fewer students want to study there and then more cuts follow.
There will be reputational damage that occurs to the university which will make it a less attractive place to come and work at. There will be challenges in the supply of the kinds of people that you might want to hire.
Professor Khour is one of several academics to put their name to an alternative proposal developed with the Tertiary Education Union that says it can save money through measures such as reducing building and office costs and recognising external research income. The alternative proposal wouldn't cut staff ahead of an expected uptick in student numbers. Geography Professor Glenn Banks is another behind this alternative proposal.
We just felt there were other ways that hadn't been explored in the proposal for change other than staff redundancies. And so we were keen to put those on the table and get management to acknowledge the potential for some of those to reduce costs and increase revenue.
Under the university's proposal, Professor Banks originally had to compete with another academic for his job, but that's since changed.
In terms of workloads within the program that I'm part of, we're slated to potentially lose a couple of senior lecturers as part of this process. And for a program that's only got 6 people in it, it's really quite alarming in terms of how the workload will then be distributed.
He and the others behind the alternative proposal will tomorrow meet with the college's Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Professor Cynthia White, and Professor Banks says he's optimistic the university will listen. Professor White says she's carefully considering all feedback.
One of the points I have made is that careful consideration of feedback doesn't equate to acceptance of feedback in every case.
She says Massey is proposing cutting 25 full-time equivalent roles, which could affect 40 people, as some work part-time. The college has a deficit of about $6.5 million, and that can't continue.
What's happened over the past 10 years is that we've had a significant decline in student numbers, and yet our staffing has not declined accordingly. So in a sense, we already have a gap between what our student income is, what our student demand is, and our staffing profile. And that's what this proposal aims to address.
Professor White denies suggestions that cuts sound the death knell for Massey or negatively affect its reputation.
I've met with a number of staff, students and members of the public, and certainly the public view that I have been receiving is that it's critical that universities live within their means, and running a significant deficit is neither sustainable nor responsible.
The Tertiary Education Union says the university has a choice between keeping its staff or heading further down a destructive pathway. Massey is expected to announce its final decision on February the 12th.
Time for some of your feedback now on the subject of Oranga Tamariki. Chris from Dunedin says 19 years working with OT as a foster parent, abysmal organisation and getting worse. Another says if you really want to resource OT, focus on poverty and fund families. Susan from Christchurch has asked, has anyone asked the children what they would like from Oranga Tamariki? Indeed they have. The Monitor's report interviews a number of children. Their comments are recorded in that report, an interesting read. One of them actually said their social worker was as useful as a child chocolate kettle. That is a flavour of some of their comments. On the subject of rugby and not going to Fiji, the All Blacks, I suspect the All Blacks are a bit chicken, this listener says. I think they could get a good licking if they played Fiji at home. Another says they've given up watching rugby. Until the referee rulings are fair, all rugby is lost to me. Won't be watching, says that listener. Casey Costello, the Associate Minister of Health, Linda says, would like to know the scientific sources for the claim that caffeine is as dangerous as nicotine. Cigarettes storm in a teacup, this person says. Typical politics.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Tēnā tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. ACT leader David Seymour says he backs Under Fire Associate Health Minister Casey Costello. Documents show Ms Costello asked her ministry for advice on freezing tobacco excise, despite denying specifically seeking that advice to RNZ. David Seymour says he doesn't believe Ms Costello properly answered the question RNZ was asking, which has caused confusion. He says she shouldn't be punished for asking for advice.
We say we want people in our democracy to stand up, run for office, become ministers, and actually go and listen, take the best advice and make the best policy. She's done all that stuff and people jumping all over her.
David Seymour says he personally agrees with freezing tobacco excise taxes. Australia will this year send officials to New Zealand to brief the government on AUKUS Pillar 2 developments. New Zealand and Australia's Defence and Foreign Affairs ministers have just wrapped up their first joint meeting in Melbourne. Australia's Defence Minister, Richard Marles, says his country will keep New Zealand updated on the second pillar of the deal, which is focused on advanced technology. Defence Minister Judith Collins says New Zealand still needs to work out what it can add to the agreement. It's not clear who exactly the officials will be or when they will visit. The Chief Children's Commissioner says Oranga Tamariki can make meaningful changes to its care. A report into state care today has found nearly half of Tamariki aren't seeing a social worker regularly enough, and reports of abuse and neglect have risen. Commissioner Claire Ahmed says she would like to see Oranga Tamariki once and for all follow through on its promises.
I believe that can happen, and I'm looking forward to working with them to understand their plans to put that into practice. We need to actually follow through with our practice to ensure that every single child in state care is safe and free from abuse and neglect.
Claire Ahmed says she's hopeful given Oranga Tamariki has already made some improvements. Wellington Mayor Tory Whanau admits staff shortages at the region's water services provider is hindering its ability to fix leaks. An independent report into Wellington Water made public today has found non-urgent leaks are taking 40 days to fix on average when the target is under 5 days. Ms Whanau has told Checkpoint the water services provider is dealing with years of underinvestment by its owners, the region's councils.
Wellington Water are under-resourced. There are not as many technicians as we need out on the ground. And I think when we look at the longer-term CCO model, that'll be a huge consideration as well.
Tory Whanau says fixing the capital's water infrastructure is the council's number one priority. In total, Wellington ratepayers contributed $110 million to Wellington Water this financial year. Dunedin's Punjabi community wants Gurjit Singh's killer caught. The 27-year-old was found with multiple stab wounds outside his Liberton home on Monday morning. The police initially said on Monday there was not thought to be any ongoing risk to the public, before confirming today Mr Singh had been stabbed and his death is being investigated as a homicide. Otago Punjabi Foundation Trust member Narendra Singh says the police have confirmed what the community already knew.
It's clear that that person has no heart. He has brutally done this. So we don't want that kind of beast roaming around us.
Narendra Singh says someone must have heard something and he wants them to come forward to get the killer off the streets. The Workplace Relations Minister has described the latest minimum wage increase as a cautious one and says it strikes the right balance. The rate is set to increase by 2% to $23.15 an hour from April the 1st. ACT's election policy was to freeze the minimum wage, but the coalition agreements commit to moderate increases every year. Brooke van Velden says she chose the new rate in anticipation of forecast falling inflation.
What we need to make sure is that we're getting the balance right between protecting the wages of low-income Kiwis and also having labour market settings that work for businesses as well.
The minimum wage is currently $22.70 an hour. And Australian police have broken through glass to rescue a child trapped in a claw gaming machine at a Queensland shopping centre. They say 3-year-old Ethan climbed into the machine through its prize dispenser at a shopping centre on Saturday night. Video shows the toddler calmly climbing on the toys as adults try to encourage him to come out. Officers ensured Ethan was at a safe distance before breaking the glass, but say he was in no hurry to get out. He was safely returned to his family. That's the news.
G'day, Emil Donovan here from The Night Show. Last night, we talked to sociolinguist Julia DeBress about why people's accents change when they're chatting to someone who sounds different to them.
If you like someone or you want them to like you, you naturally try to speak more like them.
Right.
So you adapt your language to sound more like those people.
Is it like the oral equivalent of mirroring someone's body language?
It's exactly like that, yeah.
You can catch that at rnz.co.nz/nights and tune in for tonight's show from 7 p.m. here on RNZ National.
You are back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and the Central Plateau. Mainly fine today. Showers tomorrow with thunderstorms possible south of Whanganui in the evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine. Isolated showers today. A few spots of rain late tomorrow. Wellington and Waididapa, also Nelson and Marlborough, mainly fine with isolated showers today. Cloudy periods tomorrow with rain for a time, possibly heavy. Severe gale northwesterlies in exposed parts of Wellington, Waididapa and Marlborough from the afternoon. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, isolated showers but rain developing overnight. Frequent showers tomorrow afternoon with squally thunderstorms possible. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, isolated showers turning to rain tomorrow morning, then showers with possible thunderstorms and hail. And Rekohu, Chatham Islands, rain easing to showers this evening, possibly heavy later tomorrow. It is 6 minutes past 6. I will have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi Evie, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The significant sit-down between Australia and New Zealand's Foreign Affairs and Defence Ministers has just wrapped up in Melbourne. The four ministers have just updated reporters on what was discussed, and our political reporter Katie Scotcher is there and joins us now. Kia ora, Katie. Any big developments?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, there was a lot of talk about the close bond between New Zealand and Australia and how important that is, considering the unstable and troubled kind of global situation we find ourselves in at the moment, with multiple conflicts around the world. And there was a lot of talk about defence. So this was, of course, the first sit-down with Australia and New Zealand's Foreign Affairs and Defence Ministers. And the ministers agreed to basically make New Zealand and Australia's defence forces work more closely together. The idea here is to create two defence forces which could work together seamlessly. So that includes increasing exchanges between senior military officers between both countries and increased participation in military exercises together. Now, our Defence Minister, Judith Collins, said that New Zealand and Australia are taking the step of authorising the two militaries to work together, especially when it comes to procurement. So if New Zealand, for example, buys new defence planes or helicopters, for example, we know that they could work seamlessly with Australia's military too.
Also, AUKUS was expected to be discussed by the ministers. What have they had to say about that particular agreement?
Yeah, an interesting update on the AUKUS agreement. So all eyes were kind of on Pillar 2, which is the part of the AUKUS agreement that New Zealand could potentially have involvement with. Now, Australia has agreed to this year send officials to New Zealand to brief the New Zealand government on developments on Pillar 2 of the AUKUS agreement. So Pillar 2 is focused on kind of advanced defence technology. It's still kind of mysterious and they're still working out exactly what it means, but Australia has agreed to send officials over to update the New Zealand government. Australia's Defence Minister Richard Marles said that when Defence Ministers from the three AUKUS countries met late last year, the focus was solely on the second pillar of the agreement, and they're really keen to push it forward. He said that several countries have expressed interest in joining the second pillar, and they are open to other countries taking part. Judith Collins said that New Zealand still needs to work out exactly what New Zealand's potential involvement could look like, and it's not exactly clear when the officials will be coming to New Zealand and who exactly they will be, but we're about to speak to Defence Minister Judith Collins shortly, so we'll put those questions to her then.
Thank you for the update, Katie. That is our political reporter, Katie Scotcher, live there from Melbourne, where the Australia and New Zealand foreign ministers and defence ministers have just met. Now, Hastings could be in for a flaming good night. A local red-headed reverend's invited her ginger brethren to gather and celebrate the bright red-headed patron saint, Bridget of Ireland, who turned bathwater into beer, apparently. The inaugural Gingers in the Stings, their name, not mine, is underway at a Hastings bar. There is, of course, ginger beer and red wine available. Reverend Jill McDonald is one of the organisers and joins us now. Kia ora, Jill.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Now, before I offend and I start getting texts, what do you call yourself and your fellow redheads, please?
Well, actually, I say gingers.
Do you? Gingers, okay.
Yes, I say gingers, and I love Tim Minchin's, only a ginger can call another ginger. But hey, I feel like we've reclaimed the ginger names, the Ginga names, the Oranga, all of those, yeah.
As you say, you're red-headed, you knock yourself out, I will refrain. What is your role in all of this? Why did you decide to have this gathering?
So it's actually been a dream of mine for like more than 30 years that I always thought I'd love to walk into a cafe that was entirely filled with redheads. And then I met Neil Gordon, who we're planning this together, and I told him about it, and he just makes events happen, and we just did it. So
and an important fact there, Jill, is that Neil is red-headed too.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. In fact, he shared on Facebook, he's one of 5 redheads in his family with redhead parents, and he had this wonderful photo when his youngest sister was born, and he on Facebook, and he said, when one ginger's born, all the other gingers gather round, and that's when I shared my dream, and it's just growing from there, and here we are now.
Hey, do you have any special powers? I mean, obviously this red-headed saint did. Bathwater to beer, wow.
That's a tough question, just off the cuff. I guess, I think we all kind of have special powers. We all have our own giftedness, I think.
And tell me, how many redheads are in the hood down there, do you know?
Well, I mean, we're 2% of the population. It's hard. They're just starting to gather. They're coming in. We've had somebody arrive from Whakatane here, and it's just like it's such a beautiful thing just to see them all walking through the door. And somebody's come because their grandson, they've got a picture of their grandson on their front. They're not ginger, but they're just coming in solidarity. It's beautiful.
Okay, well, who's welcome then? Do you just have to be ginger at heart?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, we know what it's like to, to be bullied or whatever, so we are not being exclusive. Like, absolutely, we say anybody who's blessed to be loved by a ginger can come. But also, like, I've had friends who aren't ginger, but they're just really excited about it. So who am I to say no, keep away? So, like, we will welcome everybody.
And you also, I believe, I think your offsider said gingers who have faded over the years are also welcome.
Yes, absolutely. So we have, because we really lament with them that they have lost their gingerness.
You mean if they've gone grey, for example?
Yeah, so they've got grey. So we've got a prize for them for the formerly ginger. They put their name in a basket and we'll pull it out of the hat, that's how we'll judge that. We've got a prize for the youngest, for the ginger gem, the youngest ginger who comes. We've got the St. Bridget most praiseworthy locks. We've got the lion red longest locks. We've got 25 vouchers, so we're giving out them as spot prizes for freckles.
Wow. Hey, so do you think this will be an annual thing, or what are your hopes, dreams and ambitions?
Look, we just want to have a good night tonight and open to seeing where it goes. Like, we've been amazed by, like here I am talking to you, that it's just kind of taken off. And I think that life is just so hard at the moment on so many levels, and people are just really excited about something that brings joy and delight. So people have really got on board with it.
Really appreciate time. Have a fantastic evening. Thank you for joining us. That is Reverend Jill McDonald there, one of the organisers of that event for redheads, or, people who love a redhead or used to be a redhead. She said they're very inclusive, having a get-together at a Hastings bar there. Very interesting. It is 14 minutes after 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It was a rare moment of bipartisanship on Capitol Hill Wednesday. Some of the tech industry's biggest names were confronted about the perils of social media and the many young people who are suffering and even dying. CNN's Tom Foreman has more on the often combative Senate hearing, which included a stunning apology.
Your product is killing people. Will you set up a victims' compensation fund with your money, the money you made on these families sitting behind you? Yes or no?
Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, whose company owns Instagram, pushed into apologizing to families who say they were harmed by online content. Some waving pictures of children who died or killed themselves. It was an astonishing moment, yet the billionaire head of Meta dug in anyway.
And this is why we invested so much and are going to continue doing industry-leading efforts to make sure that no one has to go through the types of things that your families have had to suffer.
Your platforms really suck at policing themselves.
Against a torrent of accusations from the Senate committee about enabling sexual exploitation, election meddling, fake news, drug abuse, and child endangerment, the heads of 5 tech giants tried to push back.
We very much believe that this content is disgusting.
X will be active and a part of this solution.
But the fury kept coming in a rare show of unity between Democrats.
1/3 of fentanyl cases investigated over 5 months had direct ties to social media.
And Republicans.
37% of teenage girls between 13 and 15 were exposed to unwanted nudity in a week on Instagram. You knew about it. Who did you fire?
Senator, this is why we're building all.
Who did you fire?
I'm not going to answer that.
There was plenty of heat to go around as the tech bosses were scorched with claims their products promote anxiety, depression, and violence, especially among young people.
Children are not your priority. Children are your product.
But no one was hit harder than Zuckerberg, whose attempts at defense at times were literally laughed at.
My understanding is that we don't allow sexually explicit content on the service for people of any age.
How is that going?
Is there any one of you willing to say now that you support this bill?
Many of the lawmakers are intent on overturning a long-standing federal law that immunizes those companies from lawsuits over user-generated content and putting tough regulations in place.
It's time to actually pass them. And the reason they haven't passed is because of the power of your company. So let's be really, really clear about that.
And while the tech bosses say they're happy to work on safeguards,
but you have blood on your hands.
Skepticism ran rampant.
Nothing will change until the courtroom door is open to victims of social media.
In Australia, a massive shake-up for youth and community sport is on the cards, with the Australian Institute of Sport recommending players have at least 3 weeks on the bench after a concussion. The recommendation takes a leaf out of New Zealand's book, the ABC's Gavin Coote reports.
As the dangers of concussion and repeated head trauma are becoming better understood, schools and sporting clubs have been taking steps to manage the risks. But a lack of a uniform approach is causing problems. Dr. David Hughes is the Chief Medical Officer with the Australian Institute of Sport.
We are seeing cases where schools are deciding to shut down certain sport codes because they have been convinced that their children will suffer long-term brain damage if they play that sport. Now, I don't agree with decisions like that, but it's an indicator of the amount of concern there is in the community.
The Australian Institute of Sport is now recommending a major overhaul of concussion guidelines for young people under 19 and adults playing in community sport. It wants players who show symptoms of concussion to be benched for at least 21 days and to avoid contact training for 2 weeks. The AIS report also recommends clubs and schools introduce concussion officers to ensure such protocols are actually enforced. Dr David Hughes is hoping all the sporting codes will sign up to the new guidelines.
We need to get all sports on the same page, because what I'm hearing and what the AIS hears from teachers, from parents, from sideline volunteers in community sport is that the different guidelines at the community and youth level between sports creates confusion, creates stress and causes anxiety in relation to concussion. And I think to date we've already had 27 national sporting organisation and scientific organisations endorse this position statement. But we're going to give sports time, but we want sports to get on board with this, because at the end of the day we absolutely believe this is what is best for the health and well-being of athletes and for the health of the sporting codes.
The AIS says the guidelines would bring Australia in line with New Zealand and the UK. It follows a Senate inquiry which found there was clear evidence of a link between repeated head trauma and CTE, a neurodegenerative brain disorder that can only be diagnosed after death. Professor Alan Pearce is a neurophysiologist who focuses on sport concussion. He thinks the suggested changes are an important step.
So I'm pretty pleased with what has come out from the AIS now as a true sort of recognition that this is a serious injury that we have to duly take care of.
How much of an attitudinal shift could this be for some sporting codes that sort of move away from the winning at all costs sort of mentality?
I think it's huge, because we now place athlete health and well-being truly as a priority over winning at all costs. We can't afford to have athletes retire from sport early because, they've been told that they've got to play through a concussion, or they've got to come back and play when they're not fully recovered, only to then retire early or have what we've seen, in a number of sports now, players having cognitive impairments or worse later in life.
Aid agencies are warning that withdrawing funds from the UN Palestinian Refugees Agency, UNRWA, would have catastrophic consequences for the people of Gaza. A number of countries have suspended funding after Israel accused 12 UNRWA staff of being involved in the Hamas attacks on October the 7th. Israel's offensive in Gaza is creating a growing number of orphans, with an estimated 20,000 children having lost one or both parents. Aid workers in the region say they are increasingly concerned for many youngsters who have no surviving family members. The BBC's Yolande Now reports in a warning. This report contains testimony you may find distressing.
Born amid the horrors of Gaza's war, she's never known a parent's hug. She was delivered by C-section after her mother Hannah was crushed in an Israeli airstrike. She died before she could name her baby.
We've lost connection with her relatives. Nobody came. Her mother was killed, and we don't know what happened to her father.
Over 3 months of relentless Israeli bombardments haven't spared the youngest Gazans. Israel says it tries to avoid hurting civilians, but more than 11,000 children have reportedly been killed. Many more have seen their families wrenched away. The bomb fell on my mum's lap, Abid says. It took us days to take all her body parts from the rubble of the house. By the sandy graves of some of their relatives in a school-turned-shelter, the cousins of the Hussein family sit together in trauma and grief. Each has lost one or both parents. Every day is hard. It's not nice. There's no water, food or drink, says Kinza. Everything's sad. All Gazans now strive to find safety and rely on aid handouts for the basics of life. The UN's Children's Agency says its biggest concern is for an estimated 19,000 children who are orphaned or have ended up alone with no adult to look after them.
For the youngest one, they very often cannot even say their name. And even the older one, they are usually in shock. When the extended family can be found, they also have their own children. So sometimes it's difficult, if not impossible, for them to take care of those unaccompanied and separated children.
With their lives shattered, UNICEF says nearly all of Gaza's children need mental health support. And even when the war's over, many will be left with terrible losses that they'll struggle to overcome.
The prospect of winning $200 million is luring many Australians to buy a lotto ticket today, with the biggest jackpot in the country's history up for grabs tonight in Powerball. Of course, the chances of winning are extremely low, so what's driving people to hand over their hard-earned money to take a gamble? The ABC's David Sparks has more.
On a poster outside this small business selling lotto tickets, the words 200 million are pretty hard to miss. There's not a queue, but people are wandering in to buy their chance at a life-changing jackpot.
It is a lot of money and I can help a lot of people. That's the whole thing, because I'm coming to the end of my life and it would be lovely to help my family and all the other people that need help.
You realise your chances are very slim.
I do, but somebody's got to be there to get that number. And if you're not in it, then you've got no chance.
This is being spruiked as the biggest jackpot in Australian history. While some people are regular buyers of lottery tickets, there are others who almost never buy them but have decided to give it a go. Did you buy a ticket?
I did buy a ticket.
Do you often buy lotto tickets?
I do not, but today is my birthday and it's the 200 million tonight, so I'm feeling like maybe it should be, written in the stars.
Well, like how many times a year do you think you buy a lotto ticket?
Once or twice.
So it's very rare. It's pretty rare.
Very rare.
You know, obviously your chances are slim.
Yes, that's right.
But
it's my birthday, so...
So what's going through our minds when we decide to buy or not to buy a lottery ticket? Professor Sally Gainsbury is an expert on the psychology of gambling at the University of Sydney.
And the real bonus of lotteries is that it affords you the dream, that period of time where you can imagine what could be. However, what's really important is to know that your chances of winning are infinitesimally small, to the point that they're almost zero. So that dream is just that. And it's essential people only spend money they can afford to on the lottery.
You have studied and researched a lot problem gambling and the damage caused by problem gambling. To what extent is this, can we link this to problem gambling, or is it, because I think most Australians think of it as quite separate from the types of gambling that become damaging?
Although lottery isn't a significant cause of problem gambling, many people who do gamble problematically include lottery tickets in what they're doing. It's certainly very possible to buy more lottery tickets than affordable, because if you are on a low income, then spending any real amount of money on something like lottery when there's really no likelihood that it's going to result in anything is contributing to your economic losses and your financial, well-being.
You have a psychology background. Maybe I could dig a bit deeper in what goes on in our brains in terms of hope, as you say, infinitesimal chances. Does logic go out the window? I don't mean that in a bad sense, but does something weird happen in our brains?
It is true that when people gamble, they're thinking differently. So we can have people who have studied statistics, who understand the chances of winning, but when what we call the hot cognitions take over, or the emotional part, we're not thinking clearly, we're not making sound, rational decisions, we're making emotionally driven or irrationally driven decisions, thinking, I still have an opportunity.
It was a dog napping unlike any other. The dog's owner tried to stop the robbery in progress, but instead found herself hanging on for dear life to the suspect's car. CNN's Jenny Moose reports.
A young French bulldog snatched. His owner, intent on stopping the dog napping, ends up on the hood of the getaway car.
And they started to go really fast, and I thought I was going to die.
It began as a lighthearted lunch outside a Whole Foods in downtown Los Angeles. Allie Zacharias was feeding her Frenchie named Onyx meatballs when police say this suspect picked up the dog. Allie followed her to a nearby car with 3 other people inside.
And so I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want the car to drive away, so I ran and stood in front of it, and they drove into me, and I fell on top of the hood.
The car took off. Allie says, I held on to the windshield wipers.
I was on outside of a car going 40 miles an hour. They swerved and threw me off the car.
Allie suffered no serious injuries. She began a desperate search for Onyx, offering thousands in reward money, describing distinctive features like his 2 different colored eyes.
He has one blue eye and one green eye.
The license plate of the white Kia was covered up, but Allie seems hopeful. She's gotten what she called a tip.
I just feel lost and lonely without him, and he's my buddy, he's my wingman.
And she was literally his wingman.
Oh man, that's terrible. Before we go, a little bit of feedback. Someone's got in touch about Massey University. Interestingly, connects to our other story on Oranga Tamariki as well. Claire says Massey has produced some of the top social workers in Aotearoa. Shameful to cut back when we need more social professionals, that person says. On the subject of Casey Costello, this listener, Jim from Papamoa. Hi Jim. If Minister Costello is committed to reducing smoking rates and she believes that nicotine is only as harmful as caffeine, I'm wondering if it's likely she'll be seeking to reduce our caffeine consumption levels. We can imagine the riot that would happen if that became a reality, Jim. Okay, that is all we've got time for. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. Check us out on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcast from if you missed anything on Checkpoint or you just want to listen back. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up are calling all cornholers to get down to Dunedin for the New Zealand Masters Games. I need to tune in to find out what that is.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Tēnā tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. Labour is calling on the Prime Minister to remove Casey Costello from her Associate Health portfolio, saying she's not fit for the job because of the row over her requesting advice on freezing the excise tax on